Hello everybody, here we are doing a review over the Boston Bruins Toronto Maple Leaf series. So before we start with it, please make sure to subscribe if you're new to me or hockey, whatever the case may be. That being said, let's get on into it. So game one is of course in Boston. It would be a former first round pick in John Beecher that ends up getting the first goal of this series, as there are no other goals in the first, and it's 1-0 Boston after 20. In the second, it would be Brendan Carlo who would score a goal for them as they're up 2-0, and then about 10 minutes later it would be Jake DeBrusk with a power play goal. And then 2 minutes after that, you're probably feeling like you have a little bit of deja vu, as it is again Jake DeBrusk on the power play as the Bruins are up 4-0 after 40 minutes of play. And then in the third, you would see David Kampf end up getting a goal for the Maple Leafs as they would get on the board. It's a 4-1 game, but Trent Frederic ends up scoring another goal for the Bruins as they win game one. Pretty convincing fashion, 5-1. And out of all 5 players that scored for Boston in this game, all of them were drafted by the Bruins. I believe all except for Carlo were first-round picks for them. So game two, of course, is still in Boston, and in between the pipes, it's not Jeremy Swayman who had a good first game in the series, but instead Linus Ullmark. So that's going to be something to watch out for in this game. And then, of course, Toronto is looking to clean things up as they allowed 5 goals in the previous game, but it's Morgan Geekie that ends up scoring the opening goal. Like we saw in game one, the Bruins got out to an early lead. Max Domi would get his first career playoff point with the Leafs. Kind of cool to see there considering his dad, and that is a goal to tie things up as it's 1-1. However, in the dying seconds of the first period, it'd be David Pastrnak that scores a goal to make it 2-1 Boston. And then in the second period, it would be John Tavares that ties things up on a power play goal. Heading into the third, of course, both teams trying to get an advantage here. Boston leads in shots, but it's Austin Matthews that scores. It is 3-2. The Leafs go on to win. Ilya Samsonov ends up having a good game with a .931 save percentage. And I'm just going to say Samsonov because I've heard 2 different pronunciations forever and ever and ever. The broadcasters tonight were saying Samsonov instead of Samsonov, so we're going with it as the series is tied. So game 3 as the series shifts over to Toronto. Of course, a lot of buzz going into this one as the Leafs have regained home ice advantage, or taken home ice advantage, I should say. And instead of Ullmark being between the pipes for the Bruins as he was in game 2, it's going to be going back to Swayman. However, both teams kind of having to wait this thing out as there's no goals in the opening third of the game. And of course, that leads us to the second. Matthew Knies scores the first goal of the game. However, Frederic not long after is able to spoil the party a little bit as it is tied 1-1 after 40 minutes of play. However, starting off the third period, you would see Jake DeBrusk do what he did earlier in the series where he scored power play goals. Happens again here as the Bruins are able to take the advantage. Now, Tyler Bertuzzi does end up scoring the tying goal in the third period. However, the evil villain of all villains for Toronto fans, Brad Marchand, ends up scoring a goal again to give Boston the lead 30 seconds after the Bertuzzi goal or close to it. And then again later on in the game, ends up getting a 4-2 win in this one with an empty netter for him as the Bruins are able to regain home ice advantage. And then game 4 was of course pivotal because Boston was looking to get that 3-1 series lead, go back home and win this series in 5. They would see Van Riemsdyk score a goal in the later part of the first period to go up 1-0. And then again, the villain, the rat, Brad Marchand scores in the second to make it 2-0 before David Pastrnak scores a goal near the end of the second as it is 3-0 Boston. Now in the third, Marner would score a goal for the Leafs to make it a 3-1 game. However, they ended up being stuck in a rut thanks in part to Austin Matthews missing the third period because of an illness, something that we would see later in the series as well, dealing with all of this. And the Leafs make a change as well. Net as Samsonov is switched out for Wall. Either way, they do go on to lose this one 3-1 as they are now down 3-1 with 1 game potentially left in their season. Then in game 5, of course, the talk is about the fact that the Bruins are back at the Garden and on the brink of winning this series, and that kind of makes sense, and it looks like there's a good chance as Austin Matthews is going to be out for game 5 with an illness, again after missing the third period of game 4, and you have a goalie change as Samsonov is swapped out for Wall like we talked about in the previous game 2, and this is where you start to see a lot of the sharks in the water type narrative about how this thing's done, me being one of those people. But in the first, it's Jake McCabe that ends up giving the Leafs fans a little bit of hope, and they get out to this lead. Trent Frederic, kind of a thorn in their side in certain situations in this series with some of these goals, is able to take a little bit of that momentum away. No goals in the second mean it's 1-1, and we are potentially looking at the last period of the season for Toronto, and that could be very heartbreaking for the fans. Except it's not, as neither team scores a goal in the third period. So we shift over to overtime in game 5. Again, Boston being 1 goal away from moving on to the second round. Toronto being 1 goal away from having a long off season yet again. But Matthew Knies says no, not today, as he scores a goal in overtime. And you know what that means? It means that this series is getting shifted back to Toronto despite the fact that they didn't have Matthews. So game 6 is still a do or die game for the Leafs. This time it's at home, so that's maybe a good thing as they try to be able to get this one back to the Garden for game 7. They're able to go out there and outshoot the Bruins 12-1 in the first period. However, they are not able to get a goal in that one despite, again, outplaying the Spoked Bees. Yet again without Auston Matthews, which is just crazy to me. I'm hoping that we figure out exactly what he's dealing with in the offseason. But in the second, we would go on to see William Nylander score his first goal of the series. We haven't talked about him, and I probably should have brought it up earlier. The fact that he missed the first 3 games of this series with migraine issues. So he is able to make an impact for his team in this game 6 affair, scoring his first goal, giving his team the lead as we're again in the final 20 minutes possibly of Toronto's season. But he is playing playoff hero as they need somebody to step up. And guess what? He plays hero in the third as well as he scores a goal to give them a 2-0 lead. You're thinking a shutout in a win here, but it's Morgan Geekie that scores with 0.1 seconds left for the Bruins. They don't pick up the win, but they do spoil the night. Not really, as Toronto is just ecstatic to see a game 7, and of course Boston not trying to collapse after having a 3-1 series lead. Game 7 is of course the final game of this series, and there's a lot of talk before this game because Auston Matthews is set to return to the lineup, which is a good thing, but Joseph Woll, who has been a hero for them in the previous 2 games in this series, is dealing with an injury, so it's going to be Ilya Samsonov that ends up going out there to start for them, meaning, of course, maybe fans are a little bit nervous here as Jeremy Swayman has been playing well. Either way, there is no goals in the first period for either team as everybody's on the edge of their seats, and no goals in the second period either, so it is 0-0 entering the third. We've seen that before in other series so far in the first round, and it's going to be a close one to finish out this series. And in the third, it is William Nylander again who is able to go out there and score his 3rd goal of the series and be this playoff hero for them as they are looking at potentially beating Bruins and slaying that dragon figuratively here, and you see them get excited. Of course they will be, but less than a minute later, Hampus Lindholm, who had scored 3 goals in the entire season leading up to this moment, ends up scoring a goal for the Bruins as it's tied 1-1. And of course, we don't get any other goals in regulation, so this thing is headed for overtime. And it doesn't take long for the series to be decided, as it is David Pastrnak who scores his 3rd goal of the series to push the Bruins on to the second round, as the Leafs are yet again eliminated in the first round. Pastrnak may have not scored a ton of goals in this series. However, guess what? He was able to score them at some very unfortunate times for the Maple Leafs as they are again going home early. And looking back at this series, we're going to be hearing a lot of talk about what transpired in this 7-game run. And I'm going to be honest, I picked the Leafs in 7. They ended up losing in 7. And I think had I heard that, Nylander, who played the entire season, is going to be out for the first 3 games, and Matthews is also going to miss multiple games too, I would have never picked them. But credit to them for being able to claw their way back into this and have a lead with less than 10 minutes to go, or about 10 minutes left to go in the third, where they could have been the team that ends up going on to win this. However, they aren't, and I know a lot of people talk about Woll being hurt in this pivotal game, but Samsonov only allows 2 goals in this one, and it's just tough to be in the spot they were in. They had won a couple of games 2-1, and this time the 2-1 score ends up biting them as the season is over. But again, also looking at this team for the Bruins, hats off to Jeremy Swayman, as he is a huge factor as to why Boston's able to move on to the second round. They were not a team that was able to score as many goals as they would have liked, especially after that first game where they scored 5. Without Swayman, they are undoubtedly in a tough spot, despite the fact that the Leafs dealt with so many injuries. And I gotta be honest, for the Leafs, it has to be heartbreaking knowing that they were on the verge of, being there to move on to the second round for a second straight year, getting a rematch with the Panthers, and seeing what they could have done there. Instead, they lose this series, and I believe went 1-for-21 on the man advantage in this whole run. Gonna be honest, that is not something to be ecstatic about, as they struggle to find goals as well in this matchup. At the end of the day, though, you can only do what you can do, and in this case, they weren't able to do enough. So anyway, for the Bruins, they are able to make sure they don't have any past demons that creep up on them, as they are able to get the series done this time compared to last year, and they get a second round rematch with the Florida Panthers, as last year they met them in the first round. This time, of course, whoever wins this is going to the conference final, and this is going to be hopefully a really entertaining series. As for the Maple Leafs, oh my gosh, Heartbreak City again, as this era of Leafs players goes to 0-3. Sheldon Keefe, what's going to happen here with job security? A lot of these players, is this Marner's last game? What exactly was the extent of Matthews' injury? What happened with Woll? All of these things we have to figure out here in the offseason, and I'm probably going to be doing a video maybe Monday about this, just talking about all the things that went wrong for them, as they were nearly there. But again, we've heard that many times before. Anyway, what are your thoughts on this series? Let me know down below in the comments. Also, please make sure to like this video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you're new. Everybody stay safe. Have a great night. And Eagle of Hockey, all right. Goodbye, Brigadiers and Brigadettes. This is your captain signing off. Have a great night.